But I can tell you right now, I've wasted a shameful amount of money trying to build a brand on a budget that wasn't big enough using mass media. I've done it multiple times.
Something else when you said a shameful.
Shit.
Branding in a mass market
It's ridiculous. I
in
mean,
the rural
and
area.
I've proven it to myself multiple times.
This is the PMP Industry Insider Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we take a look at what is changing in the pest and lawn industries, and we take you to the front lines, to those that are driving those changes. I'm Donnie Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which has Triangle Pest as well as Triangle Lawn. Might I add, my favorite pest and lawn care companies in the world. And with me on this fine, by the way, it is raining cats and dogs here in Raleigh as we're recording this. So I'm hoping that your day, Florida man, who's not in Florida, by the way, and that's for the feds in case they're listening. Florida man, Mr. Dan Gordon, would you like to say good afternoon and talk us through the weather there in Jersey?
New Jersey.
But only so many days a year. Keep going.
Dan Gordon, specialists. We do CFO work for the pest and lawn industry, as well as M&A work for anybody who wants to exit their business. And let's see, sponsors. Yes, I'm right on it. Okay, sponsors. Let's see. So,
ladies and gentlemen, we are recording this live in case you're wondering, and Dan is not reading. So he's not reading at all.
So I was just trying to, find our sponsors. First sponsor, Coalmarch. They've been here since the beginning. And if you're interested in marketing strategies from them, including digital and others, they are now offering the first month free for podcast listeners. Visit coalmarch.com/PMP Industry Insiders. That's PMP Industries Insiders to claim that offer today.
Hang on. He was close, guys. It's coalmarch.com/PMP industry insiders to claim that offer, not industries. So just a slight little thing there. So I'm just helping you out.
I'm going to guess if you contact Coalmarch and tell them about it, that they'll
you know what? That's exactly right. Just let them know, just so we get our bean counters in line. So keep going there, Dan.
Okay. Next one is Pest, our very favorite industry-specific insurance provider, providing tailor-made coverage for the pest and lawn industries. Pest understands the risk of business and offers coverage that fit your needs. Learn more at pestsure.com. Now that one's easy. Now this is our new sponsor for the year. It's a Voice for Pest, which is the pest control industry's leader in designing and implementing unparalleled voice solutions. By the way, it's not just PMPs. They're also tied in with Real Green, and so they're in the lawn care industry as well. I think it's actually Voice for Turf, maybe. What is it?
I have no idea, but here's what I will say for our listeners.
Each
one of our sponsors, I personally use in my own business. I'm very pleased with all of them, and of course, we would not allow them to sponsor if we thought they were a bad provider or a bad operator. So, in any case, we always appreciate the support of our sponsors, and always let them know that you heard Dan read. No. Not read. You heard Dan just glow over their business, just so that we make sure that we keep the lights on here on our podcast. So
learn more at voiceforpest.com/podcast.
All righty.
Peer groups. Are we going to have enough time to do a podcast?
I think we are. Let's just keep rolling.
Peer groups. If you're interested in joining a PMP Industry Insider peer group, please visit pmpindustryiinsider.com/peer groups, or go back to episode 136 for more information. And then you can join. Okay. Now,
you know what? I want to vouch. If anyone's wondering if Dan is drunk, I can tell you that he's not. So just.
Well, no, I'll tell you what the issue is. We've been doing this for 4 years now, and we they changed the
Something
script,
changed.
and now I'm not good with change. So, anyway, okay. So the topic today is well, our two very special guests
Oh,
are
yes.
Don
Yes.
and but this is kind of a really, really interesting topic. And the
Hmm.
way that we got it was that we had a couple people, actually more than a couple people, ask us to do a an episode on it. And it's in a growing business, which is more desirable, having that $1 million office or a multi-million-dollar office? In other words, do you want several small offices or do you operate from a large office? And so today we're going to look at the decision that people in the industry make. Is it better to scale through a network of smaller localized branches or consolidate it into a larger, more centralized regional hub that you have a call center and whatnot? And
Let, I
so
was going to say, can we set this up because not to name drop, but here we go. And I want to mention this because you're right, Dan. I mean, it's a very interesting topic, and I don't know that there's a right answer per se. It probably depends on the owner and how well organized you are and what your culture's like. Um, Dan, you were with me last time I was down at ABC in Austin.
oh yeah,
The compound, as I like to refer to it as. We were at the compound,
more like the base, the
and it
military
and it
massive.
there's security. There's like security gate. No, I mean it is massive. It is something to behold if you've never been. And they have one massive. I mean, mass. Now I know that they have other offices, but if you talk to Bobby, I mean they're like in way out like College Station. I mean they're not like in the Austin area. There's one branch. It's a compound. It's massive. It's pandemonium when you go there, especially in the morning. I mean, all good problems and all good happen. And by the way, we've had Bobby on the podcast, and his business is great. I don't mean that in negative at all, but there's that side of the extreme, right? There is everything runs out of one office. That's what we're doing now. We've also had on the podcast. Um, oh, I'm trying to remember who do I want to use as an example for this.
About Arrow.
Arrow, yeah, because they actually mentioned it. They said that they
Yeah.
have lots and lots of, and they don't like for a branch to get very very big. I don't know what the number is. I know the last time we had Tim on, and we had
Emily.
yeah, Emily. They talked about. I think they gave a number on that pie. I don't remember what it was, so I don't want to say it, but it wasn't very big. And so there's that philosophy, right? And I think that works really very well for them. And so before we get into this, I'm going to share a few experiences I've had. I'm not going to tell you that one way is better than the other. I think the main thing, and this is kind of giving away the end before the beginning, which is it really depends on what you're comfortable with and how you're set up and what your culture's like. We've tried both. We've done well at both, and we've sucked at both. And right now we have somewhat of a hybrid. So with that, that's the setup. Dan, where would you like to start?
Well, how about the pros and cons of a small office? Let's start.
Yeah. So, okay. So the argument for a small office is this. When an office is small, it's a lot easier to manage. When it's easy to manage, it's fast. You can grow a lot faster. And the reason is because there's high accountability, there's high visibility. There's things that can happen a lot sooner. And it's just a lot. I don't want to say it's less structured because that's not true. Um, but there's a lot less wheels turning to make things happen. And if you're an operator and you're listening to this, you probably already know this from when you started your business. I know that was certainly the case when I started Triangle. I was very much into the weeds. Our branch was super small. It was super nimble. I mean, a customer canceling, like everyone knew about it. And so there were a lot less ways for things to fall through the cracks because it's much more bite sized than when you're dealing with an 8 million or 10 million or $12 million branch where there's just multiple technicians and there's just lots of scale and lots of things to keep up with. And so that's the argument for a smaller office. The other thing is that I don't know that it's so much the case now, and I hope that some of these marketing folks that are listening aren't going to beat me over the head for saying this, but there was also the
Google.
rationale that yes,
Google Office.
That's where I was going. Yep. That, hey, Google likes it when you're in town and when you're in the center of town, and there's a bunch of heuristics that went into that. But there was that argument as well. Even if this is the days before you could just rent an office, from Regis or whatever. So there is that. The other thing that I would say is a positive to that is, um, you can put a lot more into the relationships, and what I mean by that is that everyone tends to know everyone. It's easier to manage. There's a lot less complexity. Um, it's just a lot easier. And listen, when I'm talking about smaller branches, that in and of itself, there's still some variances within that. Like if you talk to some folks, like I've got some friends who have, smaller offices, and that to them means there's CSRs there, there's a branch manager there are technicians there, there's all the infrastructure that you would have as part of a normal smaller pest control company. Now, in the case of Triangle, when we did it, and by the way, we're still doing it, we don't have any of that. Everything's kind of centralized in Raleigh, and of course, these smaller branches that we have, it's nothing more than a branch manager, maybe a lead tech, maybe a service manager, and then technicians and chemical, and that's it. They go there, they meet, they do their thing, they do training or whatever. We have our storage, and then they're gone. The location is probably used maybe 2 to 3 hours a day, and then everyone's out. I mean, obviously the branch manager's there longer, but that to me is the smaller argument. Shall we go to the larger branch argument?
Well, before this one is going to be incredibly obvious, so you can call me Captain Obvious, but I know when I was running branches at Viking, parking was always a problem, a nightmare. Anyway, that's Captain Obvious, but
No, because as we get into the large one, you think it, yeah, exactly. That is so funny, right? So okay, so let's talk about the larger office issue. Like what are the benefits of that?
Mhm.
So before we moved into our current building, and if you're watching this on YouTube, we're in our new building, thank goodness, which we love, by the way. But before we got into this building, we were in what we belovedly called the chicken coop. Um, it was a strip mall. It wasn't even a strip mall. It was basically a strip of just tech flex. And I started there back in 2006. And I remember leasing the very first office, and we just kept growing and kept growing and kept growing. And I think we had like maybe 5 of those units leased out. We had over half the building. And you obviously, if you're in this industry, you know that we tend to, we have a lot of trucks, and everyone just hated our guts. I mean, hated us so bad because same thing. There was no parking there. Um, and we ended up building, a new building because we could not find anything that could hold a larger branch because there was just so many trucks. So there is that. So going back to why do a larger branch? Well, some say that's easier to manage, right? It's easier to get information out. You got everyone together. You can have less managers. Obviously there's the cost aspect, right? You're not leasing out multiple buildings. You can kind of like combine everything. You can scale a lot of things, and so we're doing this here in Raleigh right now, currently on our pest side, and on our lawn side, which is where we have one branch to cover the entire metro market. And I don't know that either is like this is the best way per se. We're doing it now kind of out of necessity because I've got this nice building and I paid a lot of money for it. Should I say the bank paid a lot of money for it? And we're going to use it, right? And that's kind of my thought is me going out and leasing out a bunch of different places. And I don't know, for me, like I'm really big on culture, and I love the idea of being able to go down and talk to guys and see what's going on and get a feel for what's happening. And when you got these remote areas, it's really difficult to do that as an owner. Now that's not to say you can't have managers doing that, and you should. Um, but even now for like our remote offices, I should be out more, and it is kind of a chore, right? It's a lot easier when it's just everyone's all here. I'm in the office a lot. I can go down and see what's going on. It's not that easy to do in these remote offices, and so it's a lot easier to do inspections. It does simplify management a lot. When I mean like management, but it also complicates a lot of things as well because there's just so many people and so many customers involved. So, your thoughts on that, Mr. Gordon?
Well, I think that the team effect is you can't overemphasize that. That's a big one. Also, the cost. I mean, yes, it costs more for a larger office for, well, obvious reasons, but it's actually cheaper than
Mm.
running a bunch of small offices because of the management, or you don't need as much management, so you can be more efficient. But maybe your routes extend way out, and now you have to sit in traffic or drive more and use up more fuel and put more wear and tear on the trucks. So, there's a there's a pro and con to both, but when we tried both, right? We used to do small offices. We used to do, and then we went to large offices. The small offices, so the way we used to do them was we would open an office, we would put a sign on top of the office or out in front, and like, hey, we're here, and we'd put a CSR in there by himself or herself. And invariably they would get bored and not not really get the warm and fuzzy about working for us, and
Right.
we
Right. Well, they have no team, right? They no one to interact with, and
Now, and again, I'll show my age, but the internet wasn't as big of a thing. Now, if you do that, what's that person going to do? Just sit on their phone and
right.
the internet all day, and there's no sense of team. So I like that big company approach. The other thing is you can get a much more sophisticated communication system, and I say communication system because it's phone, it's the whole texting, it's emailing, and just being able to communicate, have a much bigger communication center. So I kind of like that.
The other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is, I it really comes down to what is your culture and what is your leadership like. Um, again, we I like everyone being together, but it's harder, right? I mean, and what I mean by that is it's harder because you know you can't. I mean, the relationships that you have in a smaller branch, when it's like you and three other people, and that's your team, and they're around all the time. Like those are a lot stronger relationships that you have, and even with your customers, I would say, versus when there's a bigger or larger branch. When I first got back in the seat, I mean, I was having technicians that go eat lunch in their truck instead of hanging out with their team, and I'm like, what in the world? This would be like when we would have our we call them pulse meetings for traction or whatever, and I'd be like, they really don't want to hang out with anyone in here, like anyway, and that can happen in a larger branch, and it's like, you know what I mean, like but in a smaller branch that would never happen, and so it really comes down to. And by the way, just if you're listening and judging, which is perfectly fine, we got our our moles and warts too, but we have since changed that culture. But I guess my point I'm making is that it's it's easier for the relationships not to be as strong in a larger branch as they are in a smaller branch, and sometimes that can also be detrimental. You know what I mean? And sometimes that doesn't always work to be the positive. So,
So I
um,
noticed one of the bullet points that we have here is that uh, the in a small branch is the initial setup and costs is much smaller than a big facility. And I would just, if anybody's visited Donnie at his Raleigh castle, uh, there's uh, just building this massive facility. I came into his parking lot and noticed that there were all of these electric chargers, and I said to him, "Hey, Donnie,
no.
are you going to EVs for your
Hmm.
vehicles? And why don't you share your reply with why you have all of these
No, I'm not going to share that because it's
chargers in
not
your
it's not
park?"
appropriate for the podcast. But I know what Dan's trying to do. He's trying to get me all red. That was required by code in order to be
Ah,
open as a business. So, having said all of that, let's
yeah.
keep rolling. So
in that blue state of North Carolina, and that's what they make you do.
that's what
So,
they make you do. Yep, yep. So let's talk about operational efficiency and technology. I think this, when you look at a larger versus smaller branch, I mean, let's talk about the technology implications. I really don't think this is I just don't think it's a factor. A lot of people think, oh, well, um, it's going to be more difficult if you have a bunch of smaller offices. That's just not true these days. I mean, the vast majority of software you're going to run online, the vast majority of scheduling, marketing, almost everything you can think of is all going to be running on online and with Slack and a few other tools. I mean, it just that argument about software and connecting people, like that argument is really gone in my mind, whether you're in a small branch or a large office. I personally, and maybe it's just my age, I personally prefer face to face. Again, I prefer the kind of the unplanned interactions. um, I don't like the we got to schedule a meeting for everything and it's going to be online and blah blah blah. But as far as like operational efficiency, especially in the realm of technology, I just don't see that really being an issue either way.
so you're right. The actual technology is there for everybody to use, and it's probably, easier to use than it's ever been, except if you have a small branch where there's one person and they need coaching, they need training, and there's nobody
Hmm.
to tap them to
Yep.
tap on the shoulder and ask for it and whatnot. So yeah, I agree with you. You can operate from, like COVID definitely showed us that
Mm.
you don't even need an office, right?
Yep.
But I think that the camaraderie as well as being able to work with each other and collaborate, I think is important.
Let's talk about marketing,
Yeah.
a benefit versus, large or small. Um, I will say, I think there is a benefit for smaller offices when it comes to marketing. And the reason is because um, typically your smaller offices are going to be much more dialed into what's happening locally. Like what community events are happening, what are people caring about in the local community. When I say caring, like if there's something specific that has happened or something that is happening. The other thing is that you're going to really know the area extremely well. Not to say that your technicians can't do that from a larger branch. It's just not as organic, if that makes sense. I mean, at least I don't think that it is anyway. And so if you're working with and by the way, I think you can actually, to a certain degree, I think you can ebb this just a bit by, having specialists if you have a larger office that are focused on specific areas. But in this case, I think the smaller branches have a slight edge when it comes to local marketing because they can get into the whole hyper local aspect because they know what's going on in that area. When you get into a larger office, that's better suited for if you're a much larger company, like if you're going after a city. Obviously, if you're looking to build mass media advertising, those types of things. You're looking at branding. You're looking at, I mean, and not to say that you can't do those in those smaller markets, but listen, if you have, let's say you have 10 different offices, and I know some companies that do this and it works very well for them, and they're in these rural areas or even they're like in these larger metropolitan cities. The amount of marketing budget it would take to bring a brand to every one of those markets is, I mean, I don't know anyone that can afford it versus if you have one large branch located in one city. Now you may be able to have enough marketing budget that you could do mass marketing and it would work. Now, I'm not telling you can't do it, but I can tell you right now, I've wasted a shameful amount of money trying to build a brand on a budget that wasn't big enough using mass media. I've done it multiple
But you were gonna
times.
something else when you said a shameful.
Sh- Shameful amount. And it is. I mean, and listen, it's funny because
And branding in a mass market is it's
it's ridiculous. I
in
mean,
the rural
and
area.
I've proven it to myself multiple times. And, so my point is like, if you go with these multiple branches, if you have the marketing budget to do that, great. But it's very difficult to brand to become a really staple of the community when you've kind of scattered out, all across the state or all across a region, whether it's multiple states, those types of things. It's just, I would say that is definitely a harder thing to do. While you may have the benefit from a hyper local perspective, you certainly do not get the benefit from a branding, sophistication as far as like, being able to really turn the numbers with mass marketing. I just don't. I've not seen anyone, do that unless they're like, Orkin or, Raw. I mean, like some major brand where they're just doing national campaigns where they can scale. But I've not. I mean, have you seen anyone able to do that successfully that runs
Does,
on?
does it still work? Like a lot of clients, and I still hear it, but and you kind of alluded to it before, is if I want to be in an area, but I don't have a local office, that I rent a Regis room or, a single office in a lawyer or doctor's office or something and put a shingle out there. Does that work for Google? I just feel like they're so smart and they're always finding you out. But, how long does that go for? Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah. No, I mean, listen, that game's always changing and you're making long-term decisions, especially business strategic decisions based on strategies is going to change from year to year. I don't think it's a very wise thing to do. Let's talk about like just disaster type stuff. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm putting all my eggs in one basket. I'm in one market. I've got this massive branch. What if a natural disaster comes through and just wipes my business? And by the way, we've actually had, you remember when we had Tim Brock on the podcast talking about this. It happened at his business up in Panama City. Or I should say down in Panama City. For Dan, it's up in Panama City because Dan is a
I'm in
Florida
New
man.
Jersey,
Yeah,
so it's
but he's in New Jersey, so it's not. So anyway, my point is like that absolutely can, and does happen. First thing I would say is this is why you have insurance. The second thing I would say is everyone I've ever seen to go through an event like this have always they're real entrepreneurs, man. They've pivoted as a business. Remember what Brock did? They went into cleanup and they started doing. And remember the guy that I cannot remember his name, but it was the Katrina guy. Gosh, what was his name? He retired many years ago. I know you know who I'm talking about, Dan. Um, he was a massive pest control company down in New Orleans, and then Katrina, New Orleans got hit with Katrina, and he did the exact same thing. It wiped out his entire business, and he got into cleanup. You know what I mean? Like he basically just changed his business to adjust and adapt to what was happening. And in both cases, and these are hurricanes. I mean, I'm sure there's others as well, and these are ones that I'm familiar with. And I'm going to think of this guy's name after the podcast. I probably should have put it on the show notes, but I forgot. In both cases, what happened is the owners pivoted as a business. They started doing cleanup. They started helping the community. It created a great name for them. And then eventually they started getting back to pest control. And you know what I mean? Like they absorbed it as a business, and it ended up being a very positive thing. I know in the case, I don't want to speak for Tim, but from the podcast that we did with him, and he was very, how should I say this? I don't want to say politically correct. He was very ginger in how he made that point, which was, in the end, the hurricane ended up being a positive for his business. But of course, as you can imagine, all the emotions and all the unknowns and all the things that could happen. I mean, there are also likewise businesses out there that have had a natural disaster, and it was a disaster for and they ended up going out of
what
business. And so,
when COVID first started, and before we became an essential service, all these viricides, like we had
oh yeah,
a
yeah.
fortune doing viricides, and got to pivot, got to
Yeah.
pivot.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's just part of being a sharp business owner, right? Is like when something happens in the market, you have to adapt and adjust. And so even if you have, I mean, going back to the other argument, if you have smaller branches, of course, something is not going to completely wipe out your business, right? Because you should technically be in multiple branches. And so if you got one branch down, it's not like the entire business is down. And so that, you can think of it like as you were doing investing, it's diversification, those types of things. But my point is that if you're like, hey, I really want to do large office, but I got to think about, the next calamity. I think history shows that even if you have this large office and even if you take a massive event, the vast majority of business owners that I have seen have been able to, they've been able to turn it around, and I mean, I can think of it as we're sitting here talking about it, I think about even Lejani's, they had a big hurricane come through and they did the same thing. I think they bought, I remember talking to them and they bought like, what are those little, oh my gosh, they bought like a front end loader and they kept that thing running 7 days a week doing cleanup. So my point is that yes, small branches is going to diversify your business. If something happens, it's not going to be completely down. However, if you have a large office and that's what you want to do, I wouldn't spend. I mean, obviously, I would make sure I'm covered in insurance. But again, there's multiple stories of people who've had that exact situation happen, and they've been able to recover by getting creative and changing their business on the dime.
The other thing with a large office is it's not one or the other. You can have a large office with a bunch of little depots where your guys go and go and get the day's work and whatnot. And it's kind of a hybrid model. So you have the sun and then you have a solar system around it with.
Well, and you bring up a good point, and I probably should have said this disclaimer at the very beginning of the podcast, which is if you've never read the book Leadership Strategy and Tactics, it's a fantastic book to read as an owner. It's a fantastic book to train your managers on. It's by Jocko Willink, but he talks about this whole ideal team size, and his recommendation is no more than 4 to 6. And we follow that here at Triangle. While I say we have a massive branch, and it's true, that branch manager's got, a couple of lead techs that report to that manager. If you going back to the compound, or should I say the military base in Austin, you look at Bobby, like one of the things I was really impressed with is they had these big round tables, and they had the same thing, right? They had these teams of 4 to 6 people. And so even though you have a large branch, right, it doesn't mean you still can't, because I personally think if you're managing more than 10 people, there's no one who can do that very well, right? It's just too much to handle. It's too much to do. And so, bringing it back, I mean, even if you have a larger branch, it doesn't mean that you can't replicate, the leadership side of things and not, make sure you keep it as if it were operating as a smaller branch. So,
Yeah.
All righty. You want to finish this out here, Dan?
I guess there's no single right answer. It depends on what you want to do, where you're going with it. I can tell you that the cost structure of a large office is probably less than multiple small offices. But again, if you're in a rural area, people want to do business with local people.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's the argument against the large office, but the cost savings and the efficiency and the team camaraderie, that's the argument for. And so I think that it's a great discussion. For those of you who only have one small office, hopefully this will, you'll get some motivation out of this talk, because we know, lots and lots of businesses who have multiple offices, and that's the goal, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, here at Triangle, we do both, right? We have I know I mentioned this at the beginning, but we have the one large office, but we do have a couple of satellite offices. And I mean, I think the main thing here is just, no matter what you decide to do, it's all about people, right? And it's all about making sure that you've got really good managers, you have really good training for your managers, you have really good training for the folks that are either in the large or the smaller, and you have a good operating system. And by the way, we're not sponsored by Traction. That's the one that we use. There's multiple ones out there. I think there's one called Scale Up. There's a few others. The main thing is that whatever you decide to do, make sure that you've got the leadership strategy in place, that you can just manage it all and you can manage it well. And either way, I think is fine. So, all righty. With that, just remember all the resources and topics that we talked about today are available on the podcast website. Take a look at pmpindustryinsider.com. Take a look under show notes. We always appreciate positive reviews, and Dan likes it when you complain. So give him a call if you got something that you want to talk about that is negative. And with that, we're signing off. We'll see you all next time. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.